Okay, so here's our main painting today of London. So let's start by dividing our page up. We'll just do this by sight. I'm going to make a mark halfway through the page here. So this is just going to help, figure out where the halfway point is. Then I'm going to make two marks which sit, one is sort of like 1/5 to the side here. One is about 1/3. If I'm thinking from here to here, this is about 1/5 of this entire thing. If I'm thinking here to here, this is about 1/3. Don't worry if you don't get this perfect. It'll still work. It's just a general kind of idea of where things are. And I'm also going to divide this side into rough thirds. Again, you don't really need to be perfect here. So I've got about 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3, and then just a little bit up from this third, I'm going to make a straight line. This is going to be our horizon line. Now to this side, so about 2/3 of the way across, I'm going to make a mark, and then I'm going to go straight down. That's going to be our vanishing point there. I'm going to draw a straight line up from this that goes to about, let's call that almost 1/4 of the way to the top of the page. And then I can divide this line into 3. So 1, 2, 3 to make our little St. Paul's Cathedral off in the distance. For this, just think about whether angles are moving up or down. So I'm going to create I think it's called a cupola. The top point of this upside down kind of umbrella shape is going to be where it is on the line. So the top part of all the details here, everything is going to be centered around this main line. Pay attention to where these angles get a little bit softer as you move down. So you'll notice that as we move towards the base, towards here, we get to kind of where there's a little triangle, where there's the front part of the building. So we'll just get that down. Don't worry about getting too many details here. We don't really need them. And conveniently, we're also going to use this part at the base as our vanishing point. So what that means is we're going to do a couple of straight lines using a spare sheet of paper that are going to indicate where the sides of the buildings are going to be and where they meet on the page. So we've got one which is kind of breaking through the top here. So I'm going to angle my paper so that the center goes right through the vanishing point. And then the base of the buildings I can see on this side of the page, they're both, let's say, a little bit lower than 1/3 of the way down. So I'm just going to make a mark where I can see the base of the buildings. I'm going to do the same thing on this page. So got one mark, it's not quite 1/3 of the way down, it's the side of the sidewalk. Then we've got on the third marker where the buildings on this side hit the ground. And they're going to kind of break through the sky around here. And then if you want at this point, and it's not necessary, but you can do a couple more lines to show where like the tops of windows are and things like that, or you can just wait till later to do that. So I've made these marks so that they're visible on the screen, but try to make these as lightly as you can. I'm going to actually see if I have an eraser so I can get rid of these marks. Okay, so I'm going to lightly erase my drafting marks. It's really crucial that you don't press down too hard when you're doing this because you don't want to damage the paper. So while I make marks that are kind of like dark from the screen, just one thing to remember when you're doing your initial sketches for watercolors is to either, you can use a watercolor pencil that's very, very pale, or you can just use really, really light pressure and a high H pencil so that you don't end up with marks on the page. Okay, so I'm gonna keep my paper dry here so that we can layer up several different layers. If you're using nicer paper like Arches, you know, you can wet down the paper for this point to make things blend together more. But I'm mindful of the fact that depending on what paper you're using, it's only going to absorb a certain amount of water. So you only have a limit to how many brush strokes you can actually use. So I don't want to use up all of those brush strokes by wetting down the page first, even though it might help a little bit with the blending. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep it dry and I'm going to mix together my background colors. Since we can layer dark over light, I'm going to start by filling the entire page. I don't really have any highlights that I need to maintain on this reference. So I'm going to dilute the yellow ochre. Let's see, I'm just testing out a few things. Okay, we need 2 shades of this. We need one which is slightly darker and then one which is much more dilute. So we've got these 2 shades here. And I'm just gonna start with that. As things move into the distance, they get paler, so I'm going to use this darker shade, the lighter shade, this paler shade, way off in the distance. I'm gonna make that a little bit darker, that's a little bit too light. So I'm looking where the light is falling now. It's just kind of where's the lightest part. It's going to be around here. And then the light gets richer as we move into windows that people are kind of moving by. So, I mean, it's a really pale layer. It's not concentrated at this point, but I can add a little bit more of the concentrated paint as I move towards the sides of the page. Just don't cover everything. Leave little corners. So essentially this, and keep your marks very vertical. This is going to be sort of like the lights peeping through the composition. So we don't want to cover up all the ground. We don't want everything to be the same color. And I'll just pull this up into the sky a bit more. Okay, and now I'm going to dilute the indigo quite a bit. It's important that this stays really dilute. So test it out on a spare sheet of paper. Okay, that looks about right. And I'm just gonna come in with this dilute indigo for the sky. And also for the pavement. It's okay if it's a little streaky at this point, just keep your marks vertical. That's key to creating the kind of rainy scene that we're after today. It'll be a little bit darker as you move to the top of the sky, so I'm just going to make sure I've got a slightly darker amount of paint towards the top of the sky. And now I need to let this sit and dry for a little bit. When it's still damp, I'm going to start moving in with the details of St. Paul's Cathedral. I'm going to use a slanted brush for this, and I'm going to use a slightly grayed version of that indigo blue. So I'm going to add the tiniest bit of burnt sienna to that to make, not even really make it gray, just make it slightly duller than the sky to create some variation. that seems good. So I'm going to keep this. This will be the base tone when I come in with the cathedral. So now that the paper is just kind of damp, I'm going to come in with the details of the cathedral. Now don't make this too detailed. Choose one side that's going to be slightly darker, one side that's going to be slightly lighter, but don't try to get every single sharp little point in here. We want this to kind of be fuzzy, because as things move into the distance, they kind of fuzz out of sight. So if you have like a super detailed building way off in the distance, it can make your composition feel a little bit clunky, a little bit less realistic and more painter-like, and not in a good way, because it focuses your attention there in a way that doesn't really naturally follow the rules of perspective. And I'm just using the side of my angled brush to get these details here. I could have probably waited a little longer for this area to dry. So that's my bad. I'm just gonna make this a little bit rounder, try and sharpen out that edge. But as long as it's, you know, fairly pale off in the distance, it should just be fine. I'll wait to do the spire to get that a little bit sharper. It's always a difficult balancing act, figuring out what the perfect kind of dryness of the paper is for doing things in the distance, because to a certain extent we want to control the lines. So we want the edges to be drier so we can do sharp lines here. We want this to be a little bit more wet so that we can get some far away details that just blur into the page and are a little bit paler, a little bit bluer. So it's sort of part of, you know, creating a watercolor landscape is about timing. So you have to have kind of like a little game plan, which is one of the things that makes it fun, but also can make it difficult. And I'm just returning to these vertical lines as I go along. So this combination of vertical lines and horizontal lines is going to create that kind of rainy effect. So the effect of reflection. And while I'm here, I'm going to follow these guidelines, not perfectly, but roughly, to get a glimpse of this building way off in the distance. I'll add a touch more burnt sienna to my paint. I'm using the same dilution of paint, but just a little bit more burnt sienna, so I can get just a slight variation in color, while keeping everything in the distance light and fairly abstract. Another thing to note is that we tend to misjudge how small things are on a page. So things that seem relevant to us, like, you know, the cathedral in this composition, we tend to think that they're bigger than they actually are. But this whole section here is only just a fraction of the page. Like, this whole area in the background is only about a quarter of the way across the page. It's only about, you know, a third of the page as a whole. So it's not really a very big area. Now, as I move into these buildings here, I'm going to add more of the indigo and more of the burnt sienna to make darker and darker values. And as I go along, I'm following this pattern of moving across and then straight down and then across in a kind of staggered pattern, getting darker and darker as we move here and here to create the reflected effect. So now that I've got this kind of rough idea where my city is, so I've just kind of blocked out these areas, just trying to turn the exposure down a bit. I'm going to come in and just use a little bit of the yellow ochre and the burnt sienna again to get a little bit more depth in these windows that are close to us. So around the corners and around the base, there's going to be a richer yellow ochre color. And while that's wet, I can drop in a little bit of burnt sienna, diluted burnt sienna, at the base of the windows just to bring a little bit more warmth there. Remember that anything that's happening up here is going to happen as well on the pavement, so I'm going to make sure that I'm getting some of that light coming in. And because reddish values come forward, I'm going to concentrate around the edges of the page with more burnt sienna, which is our red value here. We're using a substituted palette where the burnt sienna basically is our red value, and that's going to just help create the illusion of this coming forward. So the edges are closest to us. I want those to feel like they're coming towards us. As things move away, they're getting bluer, they're getting grayer, and they're getting paler. And I don't need to worry at all about the people in the reference now because those are very pale. Those are very dark, so I can just put those in at the very, very end. So I'll just make sure that I'm getting some variation in the light coming across. Again, it's just this pattern of vertical then horizontal marks. Don't worry about getting everything exact as it is in the reference. It doesn't need to be. As long as you follow this pattern, so I'll just show you right here what that pattern is, of light going in vertical strokes and also some staggered horizontal marks. This is all you need to create the effect of reflection. It's just this crisscrossy effect which creates the sense of reflections when paired with some sharp angles on top of that. So let me just deepen up this bit of burnt sienna here. Okay, so I'm going to work in some more details once this dries. So I'm going to use a hairdryer here. Using my slanted brush to do things like darker windows. So for instance, if I have a window that's kind of curved, I can go like this. For areas that are near to the light, I'm going to add a little bit more burnt sienna to my indigo. So most of what I'm doing here is just with either pure indigo or indigo with burnt sienna. As you'll see, as you move towards the light, the surrounding area gets a little bit kind of enriched by that light. So you end up with more browns towards the light and more blues the further away we move from the light. And I'm just going to use, for the time being, this brush to do the details of the windows, the block work, things like chimneys, which I can just kind of tap the tops of the chimneys into. Any further details, now that it's dry, we can get a lot of this detail in. And once I've done all that, we'll move on to the people. Okay, so time to move in with the people. We're just gonna think about where do their feet sit in relation to the side of the page and where are their heads in relation to the windows. So they're gonna be around here. I'm gonna start with the guy on the side, just looking at where he is in relation to the buildings in the background. So let's get the shoulders, the waist. Fortunately, we're just looking at the back of the figure, so we don't really need to worry too much about any specific details. We've got the coat and some shoes. And then next to him, I'm gonna start with the head for the lady and just the sides for dress. And we've also got some people in the distance, which you can place in. It's up to you. Just remember they're going to be smaller, so they're both going to be like, they're going to be within the size of these tall people up here. So the further away they get, the littler they get, so their heads are going to be both below and their feet are going to be above anyone who's larger than them. And this is a little bit of an optical illusion because you're going to think that they're higher up in the air than they actually are. But just look at where they are in relation to these people here. Remember also that they're going to cast shadows. So everything here is going to cast shadows, just the shadows are going to be smaller as they move further away. And what else? Okay, umbrella. Let's get the umbrella. So just start with the simple shape of a kind of half watermelon, half lime. And then we can carve in the actual spokes, or I think they're called spokes. And I'm also going to use a bit of card here to get some of the details on the windows, although you might want to use a pen. It's up to you. I'll give you guys both for the class. And I'm going to mix a super dark color here. That's just the indigo and the burnt sienna. I can also use this to sharpen up things like the sides of the road, but save the sharp details for the things that are closest to you. We don't want a lot of sharp detail facing further away, both because we'll get the size wrong. If we're using this little bit of card and we go back here, that's not going to be the right size. And also because as things get close to us, they get sharper. There's more contrast. Lights are lighter, darks are darker. So we want to maintain that illusion to create the effect of this being an immersive scene that we're just kind of stepping into. So we've got all the tricks here. We've got things that are paler and bluer in the background and fuzzier, which makes them seem like they're going away. We've got things that are sharper, more red, more contrasty in the foreground, which makes them feel like they're coming close. And if you look at the actual details, they're very, very rough. So there aren't too many actual details here. It's just sort of like a play on perception using, vertical and horizontal and diagonal lines, but nothing is actually really representative of anything. It's just sort of tricking the viewer into reading this set of lines into features, and organizing your color is the main way to do that. Organizing your color and organizing your contrast. The details don't really matter as much as that. So just as long as you have your contrasty bits in the foreground, fuzzy things in the background, and you kind of follow that organization, you don't need to be too specific over what you're painting. So I'm going to mix together just a very dark blue-gray by mixing the burnt sienna and the indigo for these people here. You can vary their tone by, adding a little bit more of the burnt sienna or a bit more of the indigo to one or the other. And just remember that they're casting shadows, and the shadow is going to follow perspective. So I'm going from the vanishing point outwards to get the perspective of this shadow. I'll give the lady a little bit more burnt sienna, maybe a hat. And I'm going to use more indigo for the umbrella. But again, this doesn't really matter as long as it's dark. You want this to be really, really dark. For the people that are further away, they're going to be a little bit paler, so we'll add a bit more blue, a bit more water so they don't stand out quite as much. But they'll still have little shadows that they cast across the page. And at this point, we can either call it a day, or if you want to kind of sharpen up details, if you want to do cobblestones, we can use our pen to make some even sharper details in the foreground. So one thing I like doing is cobblestones, which are really easy. We just follow the perspective here. And I'm just doing them in the foreground. So on these little streets. And we're just following perspective here. You don't need to do every single cobblestone, just a couple will be enough. Remember that they'll get smaller and smaller as they move further away, so we'll just use fewer and fewer lines. Just have them kind of fading away way off into the distance. Just doing some larger paving slabs here and then reinforcing the base of the buildings. I want those to be quite dark. Okay, and I am gonna call it a day there. So let me just move this close so you can kind of see, but you'll have this in class. I'll give everyone the step-by-step for this. And yeah, I hope this was helpful and thank you for watching. Here is the final piece. Oops, there we go.